Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing beautifully well. For today's valued viewer request, we've got new from Zigzag Ground Zero. We've got Cap Grim Reapers, a little known story of a USAF A-10 versus a Colo, which I believe is a Colorado Ang, not sure what that is, F-16 Falcon, 1997, Thunder on the Mountain. The tragic and bizarre mystery of a missing armed A-10 Warthog and its pilot who flew out of formation on a training sortie and flew to Colorado to bomb the federal courthouse, which was hosting the Oklahoma City bombing trial in Denver, Colorado, loaded with 4 500-pound Mark 82 bombs. Full stop. Can an A-10 evade an F-16 in mountain terrain? I remember this story well. Also reported the A-10 was popping flares during the encounter. So the first thing I do is I start just looking for that story. Thunder in the Mountains, 1997, F-16, A-10. Nothing comes up on Google at all. Absolutely nothing, which is strange because if something was publicized like this, then you'd expect something to come up. So then I looked at the Oklahoma City bombings in 1995 and the trial, of course, of Timothy McVeigh. Was that LLC?
Yep.
Timothy McVeigh, 1997, was indeed Denver, Colorado. Also, we see reports here of spy planes SR-71 being used to search for the downed pilot, the A-10. And then we come to what usually ends up being closest to the truth. Wikipedia is not very sexy and tends to be fairly neutral, but it usually is the simplest explanation. So there's lots of quote-unquote conspiracy about what happened, whether this guy really went to bomb the Denver trial or whether he was abducted by aliens or whatever. And we've got a chap in the stream as well that remembers when this happened, and he lived relatively local to this.
Are you talking conspiracy theories right now?
Yes, speaking conspiracy theories, as far as I can see.
Yeah.
So let's go through Wikipedia at least and see what is probably the most reliable information that we've got. So we've got Craig D. Button, who was the pilot in question, and he was born in November 1967, died during the incident in 1977. He was a USAF pilot who died in the crash of an A-10 Thunderbolt 2. We're assuming 97, it's going to be a C, it must be a C. Aircraft under mysterious circumstances. During the incident, Captain inexplicably flew hundreds of miles off course without radio contact, appeared to maneuver purposefully, and did not attempt to eject before the crash. His death is regarded as a suicide because no other hypothesis explains the events. His aircraft carried live bombs which were never recovered. It took 3 weeks to find a crash site. During this time, there was widespread public speculation about Button's intentions and whereabouts, and that's probably where the theory started coming in, I imagine, about bombing the trial and stuff like that. Events. Captain Button took off on his A-10 attack aircraft on a training mission with 2 other A-10s from Davis Monthan Air Force Base. His jet was armed with 4 times Mark 82 500-pound slick unguided bombs, 60 magnesium flares and 120 metal chaff canisters, and the Galway Avenger gun loaded with 575 rounds of 30 mic ammunition. This training mission would have been the first time Captain Button dropped live ordnance. So it's the first time he went out with actual bombs, which is interesting, and I haven't read that before. Near Gila Bend, Arizona, after being refueled in flight, Button unexpectedly broke from formation. He flew in a northeasterly direction towards the Four Corners area of Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah. His jet was spotted numerous times by observers on the ground. One observer, an off-duty pilot, said that the jet appeared to maneuver around bad weather. This observation suggested to the Air Force that the aircraft was being flown manually and purposefully. The aircraft was tracked by radar in Phoenix, Arizona, Albuquerque, New Mexico, and Denver, Colorado. But because the transponder in Button's aircraft was not operating, presumably turned off manually, the aircraft was only tracked, not identified. And this is the kind of data that can only be, like with the missing Malaysian jet, this is the only kind of data that can only be pieced together after weeks of analysis. It's not like DCS, it has to be collated together. It was only after analysing radar data later that investigators were able to track the flight, by which time I imagine the conspiracy was driving. The jet zigzagged near the end of its flight. It was last spotted in the air about 100 miles west of Denver. The jet impacted terrain about 15 miles southwest of Vail, Colorado on Gold Dust Peak. The Air Force concluded that the jet probably had 2 to 5 minutes of fuel remaining when it crashed. The impact occurred at about 13,200 feet, ASL presumably, just over 100 feet below the summit, which is interesting. So it crashed right at the top of the mountain. The debris field was over a quarter of a square mile area. Pieces of the canopy and cockpit went over the ridge. Wow. We've got a timeline then of things that were known. Search and recovery, status of the bombs, important things that the bombs were never found. They were designed to survive the impact at the speeds that they could have impacted at, but the bombs were never found. And that's another reason, I imagine, for conspiracy theories, broken arrow, that kind of thing. From a guy's perspective who has nothing in this game, I live in England, I've never heard about this, I've got, I don't know anything about the Oklahoma bombing or anything like that, so I've got no politics in it. What I read this is, as he's not going to bomb something, because if he was going to bomb something, he would have had this beautifully planned out, being a pilot, being a very clever, organised fellow. If he wanted to go and bomb Denver, he would have flown to Denver. He wouldn't have wasted his fuel, and these planes carry a vast amount of fuel. They can go a long, long way. He wouldn't have just been going through the canyons and zigzagging up, down, left and right. So I would put that one out immediately. Personally, I don't know. The zigzag, the guy said that he was shot down by an F-16. I mean, I've seen no evidence for that. If so, they presumably would have found damage on the aircraft pieces correlating with a Sidewinder shoot down, or something. It must be very hard to, I imagine, to cover up. Even if that happened and it was a cover up, I imagine that would be a very hard thing to cover up. Personally, but let me know what you think about that. Obviously, there's going to be lots of conjecture because no one really knows what happened. Again, to reiterate, from my outside perspective with no hand in the game, it looks like the guy just lost his mind, right? And that's a thing that does happen to real pilots. And there's may be no reason for it. Went off and went crazy. Flew around with no apparent aim. And when he was about to run out of fuel, he tried to climb up the top of a mountain and crashed on the top of the mountain. That seems like not a very sexy sci-fi thing, but that's probably, I imagine, what would have happened. And the bomb's not being found. I imagine this was probably a very hard thing to search, and the bombs are a lot stronger than the rest of the airframe and probably went into the ground. I imagine something along those lines.
Four times
Mark 82s.
Probably jettisoned them somewhere. And they're either
under
the ground.
They examined the rack. I thought that, but they examined the racks and they showed no sign of jettisoning. I personally think what may have happened is it's probably a very difficult thing to search, very difficult area to search, so it wouldn't be like a traditional area to search. And I imagine the plane would have just broken up into dust, essentially, on the rocks. But the bombs could have I get the feeling they could have worked themselves in a few meters maybe and just sat there probably unexploded. There was witness reports of bangs in the area, big bangs, but I think it's highly unlikely a bomb's going to go off unless it's fused. So I reckon they're probably sitting in there rusting away a few meters under the ground. However, I don't really know. So, because I've got no evidence of an F-16 going and shooting down, and I don't want to spread conjecture and get myself in trouble, obviously, I can't do that. So I'm going to try and bring something positive out of it, and that is and that is what I think. I think he tried to climb the mountain when he was about to run out of fuel, is the last kind of thing. And I imagine he probably stalled and ran out of airspeed. And this is a real thing, especially when flying A-10s and or aircraft with low power to weight ratios, especially light aircraft in mountainous areas. This has happened a lot. I've read about this. People with light aircraft, and A-10 is not a light aircraft, it's a good example of a kind of low power aircraft, go into kind of canyon type areas and they get stuck, they can't turn around, and they slowly run out of airspeed and crash. Now this, for us as a virtual pilot, is a thing that happens a lot. Almost every time we try and fly over the Caucasus in A-10s, we end up crashing. And I don't mean flying over as in flying over comfortably. I mean flying over under fire, so you've got to hug the ground. You have to go down a canyon. Eventually that canyon starts going upwards and turns into a mountain, and your plane runs out of kinematics, and you smack into the ground, and there is nothing you can do about it. The only way you can do about it is turn around before it's too late. So let's jump into DCS. Let me show you my idea and show you the lessons that can be learned. Anything you want to add at this point, RC?
One of the explanations possibly could be that he was suffering hypoxia and didn't understand what he was doing.
Yep, there's always a chance that mechanical fault could lead to something like this, isn't there? I mean, no one will ever know, obviously, yeah. But there's always always a chance that there's enough mechanical faults in there that this is, it would have led to a chain of events which would have led to this just going on.
Does it have his service record in there? Like, could he have a good service record?
Right.
He loved skiing so much the Air Force officially reprimanded him for often going out of his way to fly over the Rocky Mountain.
I mean, he definitely didn't mean to come back because he went properly AWOL.
Yeah.
So he definitely didn't mean to come back. That's the thing.
Yeah, something was weird with him.
Yeah, and this is a real thing, right? And it's not anything against him at all, you know. But people are fallible. I'm fallible. You're fallible.
Yeah.
Plane is, I mean, technically it's fallible, but, you know, the plane can't have emotional problems per se, but a person can. And, you know, we've done plenty of, after I've done a video about mental illness, how, it, you know, I had troubles and most people have troubles. It's a real thing at the end of the day. What I'm probably going to find is lots of people are going to come and say, no, it's a conspiracy. NASA came and shot him with a laser beam or something like that. Or aliens came and nicked his plane and the plane's still down there and it's, you know. But the reality is, with a guy who's got no hand in the game, probably it's the most likely thing, which is a failure of the human, which is, you know, not very nice to talk about, but that's just how it is. Humans fail a lot, right? They're not very good machines. So from the evidence that I see, he went out, he never intended to come back. He was about to run out of fuel. He thought, let's go up this mountain, kind of thing I would do if I went crazy, and didn't make up the mountain. Bit of an awkward video, this one. But anyway, let's push on.
It took him 3 weeks to find the crash site.
Yeah, it's because of what it was, obviously. You imagine trying to find
yeah, he wasn't a exemplary guy. Like, he had some issues. So
Okay, well, I've got an A-10C here. I've got some rounds in the gun, and I've got 4 times Mark 82s, and I'm almost out of fuel. I'm on dregs like he was. So everything's set up as that. I'm at 5,000 feet now. That mountain in there is 12,500 feet, so near enough to what Button was facing. Let's show you, we're going to drag something out this video, what can happen with even a lightly loaded plane that's not an F-16, an F-18, and so on. This is what happens. Full power. Bucket loads of airspeed. Flaps up, gear up, everything's perfect. And I'm almost already too late to turn around because I have to be slow enough to be able to make the turn to turn away. And I don't know, this guy climbing this mountain doesn't know how tall this mountain is, right?
Altitude.
So I'm saying, even if you're in your right mind, this is a really dangerous thing for a light aircraft of any kind.
Pull up, pull up.
At this point, it's way too late to turn around. I cannot turn around. I'm a dead man, basically. I've just got to hope that the mountain ends, which is not going to, obviously. So my last chance to turn around was about 180 knots, something like that, maybe. So the decision was too late. Get a little bit of airspeed back here, maybe. Try and coordinate everything.
Pull up, pull up.
Yes. And you know, that rocks are going to tear the plane to pieces even at 100 knots. It's just how it is. So that was my point I wanted to drag out of it, was that even a light aircraft or not anything other than the fighter aircraft, you've got to plan ahead and be really, really careful, because this has killed a lot of people in real life. And you need to be very helicopters as well, loaded helicopters as well, really knowledgeable of the terrain and where your turning points are, and not to bite off more than you can chew. Anything you want to add to that, Super RC?
Nope.
I hope you not enjoyed that, but hope it was useful. See you later.